They're in the road. Oh my God, look at all this debris.
I know. Sorry. You got it?
Yes, oh my God, it just hit somebody's house. There's a house spinning around in the air.
When I say the words Moore, Oklahoma, you probably think of May 20th, 2013. You think of the massive EF5 that tore through the heart of the city in high definition. You think of the 24 lives lost. You think of the 2 elementary schools leveled in the middle of a school day. It was a storm that defined a generation of tragedy. It was a monster that cost $2 billion and left a scar on the American psyche that still hasn't healed. But as horrific as that day was, it is still not the strongest storm to ever hit this city. And it wasn't the deadliest either. Imagine living in a place where the biggest EF5 ever recorded is still not the deadliest tornado. For that, we have to go back to 1999.
It was this week 20 years ago. Mother Nature's fury was on full display.
An EF5 tornado raged across Oklahoma.
Major damage here.
This is just the worst scenario that could have happened. Look at it. It just looks like a steamroller came through here and just wiped everything out of its path.
It's getting wider.
This is the donut hole right here. This is absolutely the potential worst case scenario developing for Oklahoma City. Do not recommend traveling down the Bailey Turnpike, and here's the reason why. This tornado may cross over or even parallel the Bailey Turnpike potentially for a long way.
A tornado that many claim should have been the first F6 tornado. 14 years earlier, on virtually the exact same path, something worse touched down. It killed more people. It destroyed more homes. And inside its core, it was spinning at speeds that, to this day, remain the fastest wind ever recorded on the surface of planet Earth. May 3rd, 1999, 2 p.m. To the naked eye, it looked like the start of a beautiful afternoon. The low, ugly clouds from the morning had broken apart, and the sun was finally filtering through to the streets below. It felt like spring in Oklahoma. Schools were letting out. Kids were walking home. The rush hour traffic on Interstate 35 was just starting to build. Thousands of people sitting in their cars, thinking about dinner, thinking about work, completely unaware that they were driving through the kill zone of a loaded weapon. If you look at a map of severe weather history, Moore isn't just a city, it is a bullseye. It sits in a geographic cauldron of deadly concoction, a corridor that seems to magnetically attract the most violent storms on the planet. But on this specific Monday, the atmosphere was playing a cruel trick. It was going to be a night to remember. That nice sunshine was actually the worst thing that could have happened. It was baking the ground, heating the air, and priming the atmosphere with explosive energy. The calm wasn't safety. The calm was fuel. The only hint that something was wrong was scrolling quietly across the bottom of television screens. The Storm Prediction Center had issued a high-risk outlook. It is a term reserved for the worst days of the year, a warning that the atmosphere is capable of violence. But high risk is just a phrase. It's abstract. It doesn't tell you that in 4 hours, your house will be gone. And just to the west, on the dry plains near the Texas border, the match was about to be struck. To get a storm of this magnitude, the atmosphere requires a very specific, volatile recipe. On May 3rd, the Southern Plains had all the components of a disaster assembling at once. The first ingredient was the dry line. This is an invisible boundary that separates the parched desert air of New Mexico from the rich, humid air coming off the Gulf of Mexico. That afternoon, the dry line parked itself right over western Oklahoma. It acted like a wedge, forcing the moist air upward. This rising air created the second ingredient, instability. Meteorologists measure this using something called CAPE, convective available potential energy. In simple terms, it measures how much fuel is available for a storm. On a typical severe weather day, a CAPE value of 2,500 is considered dangerous. On May 3rd, the values skyrocketed past 5,800. But energy alone doesn't make a tornado. You need rotation. This came from the third ingredient, wind shear. While the winds at the surface were blowing from the southeast, The winds high in the atmosphere were screaming from the west at over 70 miles per hour. This difference caused the air to roll horizontally, like a football, spiraling on its side. Once the updrafts punched through that rolling air, they tilted it vertical. The result was a supercell, a rotating thunderstorm designed by nature to be self-sustaining. All it needed was a spark to light the fuse. At 4:51 p.m., the physics finally tipped over the edge. The Storm Prediction Center had been watching the radar screens with a growing sense of dread all afternoon. They knew the ingredients were there. They knew the cap, the layer of warm air holding everything down, was eroding. When the dry line punched into that volatile air mass near Lawton, the reaction was instantaneous. First came the towers. Massive, cauliflower-shaped clouds exploded upward, piercing the stratosphere at speeds that stunned seasoned observers. These weren't gradual developments. The updrafts were rocketing skyward at over 100 miles per hour. Then came the rotation. Storm A, the cell that would eventually target Moore, began to spin. On the Doppler radar, the colors shifted violently. Red pixels moving away from the radar site clashed against green pixels moving toward it. This velocity couplet is the signature of a supercell, the heartbeat of a disaster. In the weather centers across Oklahoma, the mood shifted from professional concern to emergency operations. This was the scenario they had feared since the morning model runs. It was the nightmare scenario, a discrete, high-energy supercell forming southwest of a major metropolitan area with nothing in its path but open highway and suburbs. The National Weather Service didn't hesitate. The warnings began to fly. Teletype machines and computer terminals lit up with urgent text. Tornado warning, Grady County, McLean County, Cleveland County. The sirens began to wail across the plains, a mechanical scream rising over the wind. For the meteorologists watching the monitors, the storm ceased to be a collection of data points. It took on a personality. It was hungry. It was hunting. By 6 p.m., the storm had fully organized. It developed a clear hook echo on the reflectivity scan, a sinister, curved appendage dragging behind the main rain shaft. This hook is where the rotation tightens. The forecasters watched as the rotation strengthened cycle after cycle. They saw the gate-to-gate shear values climb. They watched the storm devour the rich, humid air of the Canadian River Valley, fueling itself for the long haul. This was D-Day for the meteorological community. They had predicted it. They had warned of it. But the worst part is they couldn't do anything to prevent it. Now they could only watch as the physics played out on a human scale. The atmosphere had broken, and the pieces were about to fall on Moore. At 6:23 p.m., near the small community of Amber, the rotation finally connected with the Earth. The initial touchdown appeared deceptive. It started as a slender, agile cone, kicking up a small cloud of red Oklahoma dust. To the untrained eye, it looked like a standard plains tornado, dangerous, potentially lethal, but seemingly manageable. But the physics inside the supercell shifted gears. The storm began to ingest massive amounts of warm, moist air from the ground level. The funnel expanded violently. In a matter of minutes, the slender cone vanished. A massive charcoal-black wall replaced it. This was the birth of the wedge. As it crossed into Grady County, the tornado grew to over a mile wide. Inside this dark shroud, a terrifying structure formed. Multiple suction vortices, smaller, hyper-intense mini-tornadoes, spun around the main center. These subvortices acted like the blades of a blender, spinning at speeds that defied belief. They slashed through the landscape, adding their own velocity to the forward motion of the storm. While the main wedge moved at a steady pace, these hidden vortices orbited the center, creating localized zones of absolute destruction. The community of Bridge Creek stood first in the line of fire. The destruction happened instantaneously. Well-built homes exploded outward as the pressure dropped and the wind hammered the walls. The force scoured the ground, stripping the asphalt from the roads and debarking trees until only smooth wood remained. Entire foundations were swept clean, leaving nothing but bare concrete slabs to mark where families had lived moments before. For the residents huddled in interior closets and storm shelters, the world shrank to a single sound. The civil defense sirens wailed across the county, warning of the approach. But as the 1-mile-wide grinder closed the distance, a new sound took over. Survivors described it as a waterfall of debris, a constant low-frequency rumble that shook the foundations of the earth. It sounded like a freight train, magnified 1,000 times. The mechanical scream of the sirens vanished, swallowed whole by the roar of the wind. The atmosphere had turned into a weapon, and it was marching northeast, directly toward the heart of the suburbs. Joshua Werman and his team from the Center for Severe Weather Research were waiting in the mud. Their vehicle, a Doppler-on-Wheels, or DOW, sat parked on a roadside near Bridge Creek. To a passerby, it looked like a standard flatbed truck with a massive radar dish bolted to the back. But this machine was the only thing capable of seeing inside the monster. As the massive wedge churned through the landscape, the team kept the radar dish trained on the circulation. They were looking for data. They wanted to understand the internal mechanics of a violent tornado, but the readings gave them a generational data that almost changed history. On the screen, a small pixel of extreme velocity flashed. It represented a suction vortex, one of those hidden blades spinning inside the main funnel. The computer processed the return signal. The wind speed read 301 miles per hour. The team froze. In the history of meteorology, wind speeds of that magnitude belong to theory, not observation. Standard engineering models assumed a maximum cap around 250. The atmosphere had just shattered that ceiling. The reading came with a standard margin of error. It could have been as low as 280, or it could have been as high as 321. Even at the lower end, it stood as the fastest wind ever measured on the surface of the planet. This measurement changed our understanding of extreme weather. It proved that in the rarest of circumstances, air can move at speeds approaching half the speed of sound. The tornado near Bridge Creek had ceased to be a storm. It was now a record holder, a physical anomaly tearing through the Oklahoma countryside. And it was still moving. The record-breaking winds were not spinning in an empty field. They were heading directly for the populated streets of Moore. After shattering records in Bridge Creek, the tornado maintained its catastrophic intensity as it tracked northeast, crossing the South Canadian River, a natural barrier that locals often hoped would disrupt severe weather. However, the storm ignored the geography entirely and barreled into Newcastle, widening its path and turning the rural landscape into a debris field. At 7:12 p.m., the wedge crossed Interstate 44, where cars traveling along the highway were swept off the pavement, tossed into fields, and mangled beyond recognition. The storm was no longer just a weather event in the open country. It was entering the densely populated city limits of Moore, Oklahoma. The neighborhood of Country Place Estates took the first hit, and dozens of homes collapsed instantly under the strain of winds exceeding 200 miles per hour. As the vortex churned deeper into the city, it targeted the heart of the community, striking Westmore High School, crushing the auditorium, and tearing the roof from the structure. Fortunately, the school was empty, but the surrounding residential areas were full of families taking shelter. The tornado then roared into Eastlake Estates and Regency Park, where the damage escalated to F5 intensity, reaching a level of violence that defies comprehension. In the Highland Park neighborhood, the destruction was absolute. Entire rows of homes were swept completely away, and the wind scrubbed the concrete foundations clean, removing walls, furniture, carpet, and plumbing. Survivors emerged from underground storm cellars to find the world above them had vanished, looking out at a flat, unrecognizable wasteland where their neighborhood used to be. Furthermore, vehicles from the parking lot were thrown nearly half a mile, landing wrapped around telephone poles or crushed into balls of metal. For 38 miles, the tornado acted as a relentless grinder, damaging or destroying over 8,000 buildings. The sun rose on May 4th to reveal a landscape that looked more like a war zone than a suburb. The toll of the Bridge Creek Moore tornado stood as a grim testament to the power of wind, and the statistics told a horrifying story. The storm killed 36 people directly and injured 583 others, leaving hospitals in the Oklahoma City metro area overwhelmed with trauma cases. Financially, the destruction broke new ground. It became the first single tornado in United States history to cause over $1 billion in damage. Over 8,000 homes were damaged or destroyed, and in the hardest-hit zones like Bridge Creek and Highland Park, entire neighborhoods were erased from the map. The physical force of the wind did more than knock down walls. It scoured the earth, stripping pavement from the roads and removing grass from the soil. But this is not the first time Moore was hit this badly, and as history affirms, it wasn't the last time either. The recurring violence in Moore stems from a collision of global air masses that occurs with frightening regularity over central Oklahoma. To the west, the high terrain of New Mexico and the Texas Panhandle, often called the Caprock, acts as a launching pad for dry desert air. As this dry air flows eastward and descends into the lower elevations of Oklahoma, it creates a sharp, invisible boundary known as the dry line. This dry line acts like a plow, shoving its way into the heavy, humid air streaming north from the Gulf of Mexico. Moore sits in a geographical sweet spot where this collision often maximizes. The dry air forces the moist air upward violently, and because the atmosphere here is often uncapped by the late afternoon sun, the storms explode into the stratosphere. However, the ground-level collision is only half the story, for the upper atmosphere contributes the final deadly ingredient.
Yeah, it is, Jerry, you're right. It's the biggest that I've seen it all day. I mean, I can't even see the other side of it. It's probably, it could be as wide as a mile.
The jet stream, a river of fast-moving air 30,000 feet up, frequently dips southward over the Rockies and ejects directly over Oklahoma. This creates a vacuum effect that vents the rising air from the storms, allowing them to breathe and grow stronger. Furthermore, it provides the necessary wind shear to turn updrafts into rotating supercells.
This thing has a very intense circulation right at the ground level. It's not very big around, but that...
When you overlay the climatological maps, Moore sits directly in the crosshairs where these three ingredients, Gulf moisture, the dry line, and the jet stream, mix most frequently. The city is not cursed, but it is geographically vulnerable, located in a corridor where the atmosphere is most efficient at producing rotation.
I got to tell you, this is a gigantic tornado. This conceivably could be a deadly tornado. Most structures, most houses will not survive this.
The 1999 tornado proved that this alignment can produce world record intensity, and tragically, the physics would repeat themselves years later. The atmosphere has a memory for these patterns, and as long as the Gulf remains warm and the Rockies remain high, the bullseye will remain painted over Moore. The record set on May 3, 1999, stands as a terrifying benchmark, yet the question haunting meteorologists is whether we will see 300 miles per hour winds again.
Oh, it is not! It is not going to miss us! Left edge. Coming right at us!
The energy available for storms is increasing, and the waters of the Gulf of Mexico are warmer now than they were in 1999, providing even more high-octane fuel for severe weather outbreaks. This increased volatility suggests that the cap on storm intensity may be rising. Models indicate that as the climate shifts, we could see days with CAPE values exceeding the extreme levels observed in 1999. The ingredients are assembling with more frequency, and the potential for another super outbreak grows with every passing spring. The current quiet period is deceiving, for it represents luck rather than a permanent shift in safety. The atmosphere behaves in cycles, and the physics that created the Bridge Creek Moore tornado remain entirely possible today. The next time the dry line, the jet stream, and the instability align perfectly over a populated area, the results could challenge our engineering limits once again. We have built better warnings and better radar since 1999, but we cannot build a wall against the wind. The energy is there, waiting for the right trigger to release it, and history tells us that the sky will eventually break again. The destruction in 2013 was so absolute that it reignited a controversial debate within the meteorological community regarding the EF6 rating. While the enhanced Fujita scale officially caps at 5, the damage at Plaza Towers Elementary was so severe that some engineers questioned if the scale could even capture the true intensity. The wind-ground scouring was intense, and the debris granulation suggested forces that we still struggle to comprehend.
300 people coming from West Moore High School. Now, these people earlier today were stuck inside as the storm came through and peeled away the school's roof.
Both the 1999 and 2013 storms demonstrated that the upper limits of wind speed are terrifyingly high. Moore stands as a monument to this violence, a city that has stared down the strongest winds on Earth twice and survived. The 321 miles per hour record remains unbroken for now, but the sky over the southern plains is vast, and the atmosphere is always in motion. But then again, we're at the mercy of the forces of nature. We recently witnessed this power return with the Enderlin tornado, the storm that finally shattered the long EF5 drought.
Oh my gosh, dude, freaking violent wedge. Violent wedge.
This vortex displayed a terrifying magnitude of strength, picking up a fully loaded train and launching it hundreds of feet through the air. Steel and engineering offered no resistance to the wind, and the sheer weight of the wreckage serves as a brutal reality check. This event stands as a testament to our fragility, proving that we remain entirely at the mercy of the forces of nature. The sky has broken before, and the physics guarantee that it will eventually break again. We've covered that in our recent video, so make sure you check that out as well. The wind speed record of 321 miles per hour remains a solitary peak in our history books, standing as a reminder of the absolute limit of atmospheric violence. However, we must remember that the sky above us is a fluid, evolving engine. The same geographic features that funneled dry air over Oklahoma in 1999 remain in place today, and the Gulf of Mexico continues to send moisture northward with every passing spring. We build our homes and our cities on this stage, often forgetting that the script was written long before we arrived. The Bridge Creek Moore tornado served as a demonstration of physics pushed to the edge, yet it was also a warning. The conditions required to produce such violence are rare, yet they remain entirely natural. They are a fundamental part of how our planet balances its energy, and the ingredients are always waiting for the right alignment. We look for safety in statistics, hoping that the odds are in our favor. But the reality is far simpler and far more terrifying. The strongest tornado in history has already happened, and the atmosphere that created it is still here.